Innovation is much more than the act of creating something new or different. At its heart, innovating is really about how we relate to each other, collaborate, and bring forth our creative uniqueness. This is the view of my guest, Leon Segal, who sees innovation as highly personal because when we learn and practice innovation as a craft, what we learn touches and influences all our relationships and interactions. Leon's perspective is shaped by his decades of experience guiding innovation projects and consciousness expanding practices. In this episode, Leo and I discuss his journey from studying engineering psychology to working at NASA in the early 90s and then being recruited by IDEO, one of the best-known innovation consultancies in the world. We also discuss a wide range of topics including lessons learned as a jazz musician, reflections on the pros and cons of remote work, establishing an appropriate process for innovation in organizations, the importance of developing a mindset for innovation, his experience learning about working with psychedelics and other consciousness expanding practices, an ideation process Leon designed to be used with cannabis called FreeStorming, and how consciousness expanding practices can be game changing for leaders. Leon, welcome to Making Business Art. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
I'm happy to be here and look forward to where this goes.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I love your background and your resume, so I'm very curious to poke at different aspects of your journey and then also look at what making business art, what that means to you, and looking at that together and sharing some reflections. But before we do that, before we get into all of that, I just wanted to, as I do, just have a brief moment of connection, just as people. And something that I know about you is that you like gardening. And that's a shared interest that we have. I like to garden when the conditions are favorable to that. Right now we have some plants, but I don't really garden lately. But I'm curious about, what is your favorite thing to grow in your garden and why?
Favorite thing to grow. There's a place where it's really fun to have almost not immediate, but quick gratification. So 5 weeks ago, we planted a bed of lettuce of different sorts.
Nice.
And we are at a point where we're never going to be able to eat all of it. I live in California. The soil is amazing. The weather is amazing. And it's just like an overwhelming field. So it's great to have that. But the other thing is flowers. I love roses. It's a more seasonal thing. It's sometimes a more delicate kind of adventure, but just having different colors of flowers and different, not very organized. I like the more kind of French or British style of gardens where there are lots of flowers and lots of colors. And yeah, I can go on and on, but I guess those would be the ones.
That's beautiful. When I lived in DC some years back, I used to rent a plot in this community garden. And it's just amazing the amount of food that you can grow. I think it was like a 21 by 21 foot plot. And I also grew lettuce. Just fresh lettuce is amazing.
Yeah,
it really is. And I used to, I found that during the summer, basil grows amazingly well in the DC area. So I remember I used to like take off like a foot of the top of these basil plants and just take bags to give to people in my office and say I might do that on a Wednesday. I would come back on a Saturday and like the basil had grown like the foot already in the peak of summer. It was amazing. It's a great way to feel very abundant, or at least that's how I felt at the time. It just felt really great.
Absolutely. And I want to say to that our relationship as people with nature is really important to me. And even the cycle where what we exhale, carbon dioxide, is food for them. And what they exhale as oxygen is food for us. And there's a symbiosis there that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And California certainly has a great weather to grow things. Well, we're going to get into the conversation, and I'm looking forward to this because looking at your work history, you've worked in things that kind of touch on traveling to outer space And then you also work on things that touch on traveling to inner space, which we'll get into toward the end of the conversation.
Mhm.
So we'll touch on that. But let's start off, Leon, by just having you share, like, where do you work and what do you get paid to do?
So I have a consultancy called Innovationship. And basically, what we do is help guide people through a creative process that's built on a process called design thinking. I was fortunate enough to be part of a company called IDEO. For those who are not familiar with IDEO, it sounds, you say IDEO, but it's actually the four letters IDEO. And in the 90s, when I was working there, we started, it's an innovation and creative design company. And we developed a process which helps people move from finding a need to coming up with ideas and then coming up with products and services and spaces that answer those needs. So what Innovationship does is work with mostly large corporations, going with teams through a creative process to answer whatever their customers and their users might need. We're very, what I call, content agnostic. It's like I work with hospitals, Kaiser Permanente, work with BMW, work with Verizon, work with toy companies. I mean, we bring in the process. The clients are the experts in their particular field. And what we bring in is how to collaborate creatively to come up with new ideas. So
Yeah.
that's what I do, and that's what I get paid for doing.
Excellent. Can you say more about the name Innovationship? Where does that come from?
So Innovationship comes from when you add ship to the end of a word, there are a few things where it touches. One is a profession, like ambassadorship is a profession. The other is a capability, like musicianship, craftsmanship. So innovationship is really looking at innovation as being both something that is a profession to be learned. It's not like, oh, he's a lucky guy, he's creative, but it really is, it's work. And the other side is really just back to the word art that you use. That's where it connects to the craftsmanship of something. It's that doing that comes from a place of, I'd say, focus on quality and some emotional resonance that goes beyond quantity.
Yeah. And I also like your tagline. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so the tagline for Innovationship is innovation made personal. And for me, in the end, I've got enough white in my beard to be able to speak about my experience. In the end, it's all about people.
Mhm.
And in the end, it's all about, beyond this, the relationship part of working collaboratively and how do we relate to each other, but also there's a lot of personal that comes in there. Creativity is very personal. Each one of us has our own creative uniqueness. I even feel that for people, creative expression is an innate need. Just like we need to eat and drink and breathe, we need to find ways to express our unique creativity. I'm sitting here, I'm watching you on the screen, I say, there's a unique point of consciousness that you kind of represent. And whatever you bring into the team or whatever you bring into the world is unique to you. And when you connect with that creative uniqueness, it's a very personal thing, because then it comes into expression everywhere in your life. So many times, so if we work with a team and give them creative tools, one of the important things I say to them is, if you learn how to brainstorm or how to prototype or how to observe and listen to people, it's not your new skill will not end at 5 o'clock when you leave the office.
Right.
You'll go home, you'll be a better listener to your family. You will bring your brainstorming tools maybe into your community when you're trying to solve some problem in your neighborhood. So it's, in the end, it's all personal. And it has to be, because we see the situation the world is in today. We need to take everything very personally in order to make whatever difference we can to better the state that of the things as we see them.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. So we'll get to unpack and revisit your work at Innovationship in a little bit. But first, I wanted to like jump in the time machine and wind the clock back to your previous experience. And so I know that you started like your adult working life as a pilot in the Israeli armed forces. And then over time, you found your way to the United States and you did a doctorate in psychology. And that was in engineering, cognitive psychology and engineering psychology, if I got that right. Tell me about what was the focus of your thesis and what did you learn from that research? What were your main takeaways?
Okay, so again, yeah, my doctorate was in what's called, I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, and they have a degree in what's called engineering psychology, which is a combination of cognitive psychology, what's called human factors, and engineering and design. So having been a pilot, and one of the reasons I went to the University of Illinois is they have an aviation research laboratory. And I did actually all my studies with a scholarship from NASA, building some helicopter simulator there. And then I got invited to NASA Ames here on the peninsula just south of San Francisco to work on what is the design of cockpits for airplanes and spaceships, or basically, if I can say it, it's how do people collaborate in a small space doing a task like flying a plane or a spaceship? And what is the impact of the design of the space on the quality of their collaboration? There's something about being together in a space that people communicate in different ways. My focus was actually a lot on the nonverbal communication. We know that 80-90%, in different studies talk about it differently, but a very high percentage of communication between people is nonverbal. Words come on top of the nonverbals. And I can give you an example. If you're sitting in the passenger seat and you're in a car and somebody's driving and she keeps kind of looking up at the rear view mirror, but just like that, driving and looking, immediately we assume certain things. Maybe there's a police car behind her. Maybe there's just somebody who's driving too close behind and it feels uncomfortable. But by just seeing someone do something, that communicates to us. I coined a term called consequential communication. And that is that whatever we do, the consequence is that it communicates to everyone around us something. And turns out a couple of decades later that the term consequential communication, which was first mentioned in my PhD, has become an area of study in human factors. And there's a few universities that really are focusing on that. But for me, it's always been fascinating to understand how much we don't have to say that gets communicated.
Yeah.
I'm kind of jumping here, but just to say I'm producing a film about education in jazz. And one of the
Mhm.
things that happens in jazz, of course, for musicians,
Mhm.
jazz is a language, but there is so much. I know a few very kind of high level expert professional musicians where the pianist says, I know just by the way he raises his shoulder which note he's going to play, just because
Mm.
they've played together for so long. So this is again back to what I did at NASA, was how to design spaces for people to collaborate better through nonverbal communication.
Yeah, I love the tie-in with the jazz band because where I also wanted to probe is whether there's any inspiration or metaphors that you've carried over to your work now, right? Inspired by that work in your thesis, in as far as yeah, the nonverbal communication and other forms of communication that happens when we're doing teamwork in the 21st century. Is that something that you've brought over consciously, or maybe you think there's something just kind of subconsciously in the back of your mind that's percolated into your work?
So music is definitely a place I go to very easily. I
Mhm.
played the saxophone for many years, and jazz is the music I love most, although I love listening. I love music. So music from all over the world. And
Mhm.
I think the point with music is the beautiful thing about jazz specifically is that you get a combo that works together. And at different points in what they play, one person gets to shine, to take the solo and express their creativity in the best way possible. And the role of everybody else is to make that person sound the best. And
Mm.
then that person
Mm.
completes their solo and somebody else steps up. And now they go, and their role is to support that. And I just love that. And I see it in creative teams. So again,
Mhm.
in working, let's say, with Honda, and taking a team of multidisciplinary people, an engineer and a marketing person and a professional driver, and just putting that team together and giving them the tools to be as creative as possible, for each one of them to shine, but not to take over, how to deal with the ego. So the ego isn't
Yeah.
part of there. You talk about us as a group rather than this was my idea kind of thing.
Mhm.
So the world of music is one that I definitely lean on a lot.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking of this. Is there the past two and a half years, or however long it's been that we've been working remote due to the pandemic? Yeah, have you had any insights or observations around what's been lost or gained when we do have to work remote? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. So we've gained a lot, we've lost a lot. We've gained time. We're not
Yeah.
sitting on the roads waiting to get someplace. And that also translates to money. We're not burning gas and all of that. And it also, I remember the first period, the first few weeks or even months when COVID just hit, the air was cleaner. There weren't any planes flying around. It was a magical time, which also shows us as a humanity, if we decided today to really get up and battle climate change, we
That's
could
right.
do it. So we gained that for sure. We gained time with our family and our loved ones, which is really important. So many people now, this whole thing of the great resignation and people looking for other job places, is they realize they don't have to give up parenting. There's another way to do things. So
Mhm.
we've definitely gained that. And we've also, in a kind of inverse way, we've gained a deeper understanding of how important it is for us to get together. That's that's really an important part of it. And what we've lost, we're born, our nervous system is wired for connection with people. we were born, we were tribes, we're tribal animals or packs or whatever metaphor you want to use there. And we long for direct connection with people. And so we lost that. And we lost, I have a whole list of things, but I'll jump to the one that for me is most important is we've lost the opportunities for surprise, for unplanned interactions. It's a well-known thing in the field of innovation.
Yeah.
And Steve Jobs is the one who said that the brilliant people he's worked with simply made connections, unexpected connections between existing things. And it's a well-known thing in an office that, around the water cooler is where great ideas pop up, because you meet somebody working on another project and you say, what are you working on? And suddenly you make a connection between their idea and your idea. This doesn't happen in planned meetings or in Zoom sessions. This happens in a most spontaneous, unexpected way. And that's something we've lost. We've lost that surprise of walking down the street and seeing someone and thinking or bumping into someone you haven't seen in a long time, and what that gives us. So one of the big pieces of work that I'm doing now with my clients is how to structure hybrid work to allow more of these spontaneous interactions.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting times, but I also reflected when the lockdowns were happening, how it would have been very different to have a lockdown in 1994 than in 2020, right? Because we had all this technology that allowed for still not optimal, but a lot of communication. And you and I have met, we live in opposite coasts of the US, and it's just been great to meet. I now have friends around the world, literally, that I met because of the pandemic and the conditions that created. So anyway, there's always kind of the pluses and minuses of things.
Let me ask you, how has your life transformed with this revolution in the way we do work?
Oh, well, there are different ways I could answer that question. On one hand, it really it eliminated travel. So that gave me the opportunity gave me back more time and the opportunity to have some routines for self-care and my health. So that was very positive. And like I mentioned, just meeting people from literally people from India and the UK and many other parts of the world, and to experiment and do new things. So I have this nice camera and I've been learning new things, right? Just increasing the production value of being online for various reasons, for fun and then for work and production value as just to look better. But what else? But then on the other hand, it is isolating in the physical sense. So I see friends, right? My friends and colleagues online, and we collaborate and we do work. And then it's nice to sleep in my bed and spend time with my partner day to day and not be my body doesn't. I like going places, Leon, but my body doesn't like the process of going to the places. My body doesn't like flying and changing time zones very much. So that's been a bit of a relief. But I think overall, starting to come out of this, I think my toolkit is expanded. I've dropped some limiting beliefs. I myself and some of my colleagues thought this design thinking stuff, you can only do it in person. And now it's oh no, we can really rock it online and be very effective. It's not the same, but we can be very effective and dynamic and entertaining and engaging online. So on the balance, I think there's more gained than lost, and hopefully we can start to get together in person a little more. But I'd like to keep some of the remote stuff around, because the gains in time and just personal self-care and health it's a plus. So that's my answer to that.
So I'd say another thing that I didn't mention, which is a huge gain from this way of work, is we get a little window into other people's personal life. So I'm looking in the background and I look at, I don't know if that's Yoda there standing on the...
Baby Yoda.
Baby Yoda.
Yes.
And So that's something. There's a
Mm.
picture behind you. I see you have a chair with a headrest. So I can make an assumption that you took time to choose an ergonomic chair because you spend a lot more
That's right.
time in it. And you talk to people and suddenly the cat jumps up or the children run in the background
Hmm.
or the wife kind of leans in and goes like this. I mean, there's something very personal that opened up through these Zoom interactions, which I find delightful. And working with teams, you see people who've worked together in corporations for years and never knew something personal about the other person because they always met in the office. And suddenly they're there and they say, that's a beautiful picture. And the person says, oh, I painted it. And say, you paint?
Hmm.
So there's something here that we've gained that I find very valuable.
That's so true. I think it did invite some of us to drop a little bit some of that mask or facade that we put on at work. And like a personal policy of mine that I bring up in when I'm working online with people is pets and kids are welcome. So if somebody pops
Yeah.
by and says hi, I really encourage that. In fact, we were with some colleagues, we were meeting with a large client, a healthcare company this morning. And so we were like, I was opening up the meeting by just inviting people to share something that brought them joy. And so people, like one person was sharing that they have this 10-month-old baby and the baby's taking the first steps. And then somebody else shared about their kids, and somebody shared that they had a 21-year-old move back in. So that was not a moment of joy, but it had some other joy
Right.
to
Yeah.
share. So that's great, just to make it more human. Because I mean, honestly, Leon, it's like we're in Earth for a short while, and we take these things so seriously, and it's just really not that serious. At the end of the day, I think it's more about trying to have enjoyment in life and not make it so solemn.
Yeah. And I agree. And it also brings up the fact that so many we talk so much about the young generation and how technology is making it keeping us apart and making us more distant and less connected. But it's not the tool, it's how you use it, right?
Absolutely.
We know that a sharp knife can be wonderful in the hands of a sushi chef that cuts thinly, but it can cut your finger off if you're not careful. This deeper personal connection that we get, and even again, the connection I 5 years ago, I wouldn't think, well, I'm going to establish a new relationship with someone in Florida. It's like, why? Because I'm walking around San Francisco. These are my
Mhm.
people. But now it's opened that up, that flexibility and that again, ability to drop in and be this personal is a wonderful thing that technology is providing us.
Absolutely. Well, I guess it's the closest thing to teleporting until we figure out the Star Trek technology and we can actually teleport physically somewhere. Might
Yes,
happen. It might
absolutely.
happen.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for the questions and that conversation, Leon. Leon, so before you mentioned going to work for IDEO, and IDEO, it's a among the people who know the brand, it's a beloved brand. I think it's inspired many people in a number of ways in terms of having a more comprehensible, structured process for innovation and changing people's minds about ways of working and how to connect with their customers. Can you share more about how did you end up working there in the 90s, and what did you learn from working there?
So I was, as I said, I was doing my PhD. I completed my PhD at NASA, and I was working at NASA in the human factors division there, doing the design work. And together with a colleague of mine at NASA, we opened a small consultancy firm called Interface Analysis, which we opened it in like 91, and it's running. It's a very successful company. But at the time, Silicon Valley was kind of growing very rapidly in the early 90s. And we gave kind of consulting services in human factors, which basically we're both cognitive psychologists and talking about what is the experience that people have and how can we design better experiences. And we worked with a few clients, and one of the clients was IDEO. There was a project they had there. They were short-staffed, and they were looking for a human factors specialist to come and join the team. And I joined, and I fell in love. It was just, I found my tribe. These are my people. The atmosphere, everything there was fantastic. So after a while, I decided I kind of sold my share in interface analysis to my partner. And I joined IDEO and was working there in Palo Alto. At the time, that's where the headquarters were. I think the thing about IDEO was the culture, which a lot of credit to David Kelly, who founded IDEO. He was also founded the D School at Stanford. Something about getting together, and he describes it. He said he's a very creative person, clearly, but he said, I wanted to just find a place where I can work with my friends and make money, right? But it really was something about the multidisciplinary approach of each individual person and bringing people together and being able to be playful and creative and take the risks. Because as we know in innovation, most projects, when you talk about startups, let's say 90% or so fail.
Yep.
And if you're able to approach life in a way that everything you do is a lesson and a learning opportunity, then there really are no failures. And there's a way where that was approached. And I have to say, the respect that people had to the psychological part of design and technology.
Right.
To the fact that in the end, whatever product you produce, it can be something like this, or it can be this microphone, or it can be a shirt. Whatever we produce, in the end, it's all about giving somebody a new experience. So how about let's understand the experience first and then find out technological ways to somehow offer it to people. And when you have designers who get that, and engineers who get that, and marketing people and strategic experts who get that thing of, it's all about people. And we talk a lot about human-centered design, right? So two things I want to say there. I'll get to the human-centered in a second. I've also always said that design thinking as a term is not a good term because it's actually all about doing.
That's
Design
right.
thinking sounds like a bunch of people sitting around with their hands like this around the table and thinking, but it's not that. I know they mean the design mindset, but really design thinking is about just doing, just prototype, try, fail, learn, succeed, just do it again. Let's remove the drama from it all and be more playful. And that thing in the IDEO culture was very powerful. I said something about human-centered design or human-centered innovation. And I want to say that I think when we look at the world today, one of the things, and this is an emphasis that we put on at Innovationship and the work I do now, is to think of world-centered design. We're not designing just for people. I mean, if I design a medical device that saves some people, but pours the manufacturing process pours so much toxins into a river and it kills off the fish and all the animals that eat the fish, then is it really right for me to design that medical device? I mean, we are all interconnected and interdependent. And so if we can raise our game from human-centered to world-centered,
Mhm.
including people, of course, then we're kind of expanded our connection with nature, our own responsibility, accountability, and as I said, generations down, what are you going to tell your grandkids that you did when the world was burning? So
Right.
I know I dove down the deep end here into some substantial questions, but
Well,
that's part of the work.
well, I'm gonna poke at that a little bit in a friendly way, but it's more about teasing out a distinction because I've encountered this conversation. I haven't really had the conversation with a number of people, but there's with one colleague that I can think of because there's at least when I'm doing work, I think of it as like a telescope, right? There's different levels of zoom at looking and understanding the problem and what we're doing. And there is, in those levels of zoom, there is a point where we do have to be thoughtful and design for human behavior and how do we shape choice. I'm thinking about like in behavioral economics, the geeky term is choice architecture, but shaping choices,
Mhm.
enabling people to make more constructive, better choices, healthier choices, and just taking into account how humans work and designing for that in this bigger context. And I raise that because at times when I've tuned into that conversation, there's this idealism. Say I live in Miami, right? And Miami does not have a robust public transportation system. It has some buses, it's a little bit of rail. Overall, it might take you 3 hours, right, to do a bus ride that shouldn't take that long because of wait times and so forth. And it's a challenge to ask people to have a 3-4 hour wait versus getting in a car and getting somewhere in 15 minutes, right? That's
Right.
just not going to happen.
Yeah.
So people are not that magnanimous, right? That they're going to be like, oh yeah, we're just going to give up our cars. So it's like, how do we account in that conversation for that level of understanding there versus being like overly utopian or optimistic that everybody's just going to start riding the bus or make a choice that is just not really realistic, right? Like if we track to human
Yeah.
behavior, there's some choices that are just not going to happen. So how do we design taking out human behavior to create those choices? So I'm just going to pause
Hmm.
there and see if you have a reaction, because otherwise I'm just going to
Yeah.
ramble. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, my life partner, her name is Anna. She wrote a book
Mm-hmm.
called Living a Spiritual Life in a Material World.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, we're all kind of unique points of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in a material body and in a material world. And there's
Right.
certain limitations that imposes on us. And so we can have an expanded consciousness and vision of possibilities, but bringing it down to earth is another thing. So what's important is to have the intention, as you said, with the telescope, to zoom in and out, to
Mm-hmm.
see the broader field, to have an understanding of the impact of our actions, to have an intention to do good. But then, as we know, there's so many compromises we need to make in our life because, first of all, each one of us is just one individual.
Right.
And any design process is really, it starts out as the classic shape of you start out defining something, then expanding into all the possibilities. And then comes that really hard and painful part where you need to turn the corner
Yeah.
and start converging onto something. And as you do that, if you had all these possibilities, the minute you've turned that corner, you're actually starting to say, what are all the things that I'm not going to do, except for this one?
Mm-hmm.
Michael Porter, who teaches strategy
Mm-hmm.
at Harvard, he has one of his definitions of a company's strategy is defining all the things you're not going to do except that one thing. And that's really important. So that's the place of, again, for me, when you gave the example with the bus and the cars and stuff, it's, we live here in the material world, and we need to accept the fact that here we are.
Yep. Now, all that said, let me just add this. For a long time, I've been a proponent of voting with your wallet. Because I started out, I've been working in nonprofits and the things and looking at like benefiting the social ecosystem for everybody. And over time, I just noticed that there's just a lot of activism that doesn't really land. It doesn't work. It doesn't change. Sometimes it kind of backfires. It just produces more resistance. And at the end of the day, it's about voting with your wallet. Well, what are you giving money to? Because you're giving oxygen to to those things. Like, those are your choices, right? In fact, I got this from somewhere, but it's like, give me your credit card statements and I'll tell you what your values are, because then you can see what choices you're making, right, month to month. And then with COVID, as you mentioned, in those days, some businesses just crumbled in like a month or two. And that was very validating to me. I said, like, wow, if enough people were to align and stop sending money in or to certain things, you can literally change the world in 90 days. If you can achieve that level of alignment, which that in itself is, okay, maybe, can we do it? We don't know. Maybe it's a little utopian, but that was just really interesting to live through that experience and see that happening. So anyway, so maybe there's some hope after all there to achieve some big changes in a somewhat short amount of time.
Yeah, I truly hope that enough of us have learned that is possible, right?
Yeah.
But we have so little control. Again, back to IDEO as an example. For a long time, there was an absolute kind of agreement between the people at IDEO that doing no work for the defense industry or the military complex, military industrial complex.
Right.
Everybody said, absolutely not. Other people can do that. We're not going to do it. Then at some point, people started saying, well, if it's a defense technology, then maybe yes. But I spoke to an ex-colleague who was a longtime IDOer, and he was invited as part of doing some project for the Navy. He was invited to ride in a submarine to see what that experience is like. And after that trip, he came and he told me it's an amazing experience and all of that. Take a ship out into the middle of the ocean and get on a submarine, go underwater. He said, we've always said we don't want to work with the defense industry. He said, I walked into the control room in the submarine and everybody sitting there was using the Dell laptops that IDEO designed. So we have so little control, and so it's so hard to know what impact the work we do will have. Where again, I come back to the intention is what we need to make sure we have. I think there's this old, I think it's a Native American tale about a young man who comes to the elder and says, I'm having such a hard time. I feel there are two wolves inside me and they're fighting all the time. And there's one wolf who's just benevolent and good and wants to be good and friendly with the other. And the other is just a mean, dark kind of character, and they keep fighting. And I don't know what to do. It's like, I don't know. And he turns to the elder and he says, which one of these internal wolves of mine is going to succeed? And the elder says to him, the one that you feed.
Yeah.
And it's all about really where we put our intention, where we want to go, which is a really important point to make actually a discipline to stop and reflect and say, what am I doing? How am I doing it? And having more center and clarity on that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm hearing that the culture at IDEO, that you spent time really unpacking that, so that seemed to have like a very big impact on you. And I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Peter Drucker who said that culture eats strategy for lunch, or something to that effect.
Yes,
So
exactly. Yeah.
so let me pull out that thread and talk about process, because I also have a friend who says that process eats goals for lunch, and she hates smart goals. She sees process as being very important. She's a classically trained musician, so again, there's the musicianship showing up there. But IDEO definitely has a process, like a structure, right, that makes the flowering of innovation a little more consistent and not predictable, but there's just more structured. Could you talk about just the importance of that process that you learned, and the importance of process in being able to put out consistent creative work for teams and organizations?
Sure. And I'll say, first of all, that innovation is a journey. It's not a destination, right? It's a mindset and a way of saying, I'm going to be open to explore the world. And just like a journey, it has its risks, it has its beautiful gifts and surprises. It's got moments where you are literally lost and don't know. It's like, invariably in any project I do with a team, if we're truly exploring, there's a time, 2-3 weeks into it, a couple of months, it depends what the duration is, but somewhere in there, everybody's looking around and confused, and what are we doing? Did we waste all our money doing this? Why are we going there? And I always say to them, take a deep breath. If you're lost, you're doing well, because it means you're
Absolutely agree. Yes.
truly exploring, right? So in that respect, if you talk about process, it really is having the skills and the tools to good hiking shoes, a good tent, a good sleeping bag to go on the journey, making sure you have enough food, or in the case of innovation, you have enough money to take you there kind of for a long enough time. And also, my business is to be a guide. If I want to go and do a safari in Africa now, I can go to Kenya and hire a car and start driving around looking for animals. But you know what? I take a guide.
Yeah.
Someone who has the experience, the knowledge, and the ability also to plan and guide my journey based on my capabilities. So a good guide will not take a 80-year-old man on a 20-mile hike. A good guide will take you, if you said ahead of time that you love seeing birds, he will take you to a place where you can see more birds than hippos. So that metaphor of it being a journey, and the importance of accepting the fact that what you need is the mindset of being an explorer, and then knowing that it's a journey. And today, when companies come and say, I want to do an innovation project, I really many times tell them, if you just focused on doing this 3 months and thinking you're going to do an innovation project, it's a waste of your money. Innovation is not about that. It's truly a mindset and a way of being in the world that will then, again, cascade to many places, many other projects you're doing, but also, back to what I said earlier, into your personal life.
Yep. Yeah, I'll yes and you in that, just having a guide also helps you relax and release, and there's a lot to be said for relaxation and creativity. It's really necessary. I mean, I
Mhm.
don't think we can really be creative if we're really constricted. I know some people may argue like, well, I work well when I'm on a deadline, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But in general constriction, I think that just really blocks at least really good stuff from bubbling up. And then, funny enough, there's that parallel of having a guide in the exploring innovation and creativity, and then we'll touch on this later. Also, having a guide in exploring inner space, but we'll
Mhm.
talk about that in a few minutes. Yeah, absolutely. So having a guide is
So
important. Any,
let me just jump in here and say
yeah,
that what a guide provides, as you said, is the
absolutely.
safety
Yeah.
to relax. To relax, you need to feel safe. And this is, I do a lot of kind of mentoring of executives. And what a good CEO or team leader has to be able to do is to provide safety for the team, to provide safety for the people, to give them permission
Yeah.
to be playful, to fail, to succeed, to explore, to test. All of that, when you talk about allowing people to relax, that is a really important place. And good, that's what good leaders do. Really, the best leaders I know are people who allow the people they work with to relax and bring out their own personal best in that context.
Absolutely. So we talked about again. Any other thoughts on process and the importance of it in doing creative work, innovation work?
So when I go into a company, I ask them, so what's your innovation process? And it's in the past, I'd say 10 years, 15 years, it's become better. But I've come across companies that say, well, we don't really have a process. We just have the smart guy in room 13 and he brings out ideas and we do stuff. And what I say is, you cannot not have a process. If you don't know your process, you have a process, but it's a bad one.
Mm-hmm.
You always have a process. And what's important for that process is to be most culturally appropriate. So when I get a credit card company where the CEO comes to me and says, I want my company to work like Apple. I want to be the Steve Jobs of the credit card world. My question to him is, first of all, there was only one Steve Jobs.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is, it's not appropriate for you. You're in finances, your people come from a different background of training. For you to take what you think is Apple and try to do it in your company, you're going to fail. And indeed he did, because he tried to do it in another way. And I chose
Right.
not to work with them.
Yeah.
So you have to have a process, know what you're doing. There's a system of movement called the Feldenkrais system. Have you heard of
Mm-hmm.
it? It's a system
I'm vaguely familiar with it. Yeah.
of body education. It's called awareness through movement.
Mm.
And Moshe Feldenkrais, who was the founder, has a very famous quote where he says, in order to do what you want to do, you have to know what you're doing right now.
Mm.
In order to be able, so you have to know your process,
Yeah.
know what you're doing, stick to it, so that in the end, when you get to a certain milestone, you can reflect, look back and say, this is working, this needs a bit of fine tuning. Why don't we add a little bit of this here? And then say, okay, now let's do this process. And this cycle, this essential cycle of kind of setting an intention, taking an action, and then reflecting on it. And then that reflection giving birth to the next intention, action, reflection. That cycle is a process in and of itself. And that's the way to continuously keep your own process alive and productive.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for bringing up that story, because it reminds me of this difference of like the ego-driven approach, which it tends to be very solemn because it's about the self and looking good, versus the service-driven kind of people-centered approach of, well, what problem am I solving and how am I creating a superior experience or a different experience for this group of people? And so it's such a different mindset. Yeah, I think I would pass working on somebody who came to me and said, I want to be the Steve Jobs on such and such, because that is just not going to go in a direction where I care to be involved in.
Right.
So for sure, totally appreciate that. So then building on this notion of process, I wanted to unpack with you a little bit more about, so what needs to be true for leaders and teams to do really great creative work? Like what are the conditions that are necessary for that to happen? I think you already touched on a few things, but let's weave that together and maybe there's a few more things that you can add to that.
I think there's the top down and there's the bottom up.
Yeah.
The top down is the CEO, the board, the leader, leadership having a clear vision and intention, providing the resources and the permission for people to be creative.
Yeah.
The bottom up is the people who actually do the work, for them to have the skills, the tools, and most importantly, the mindset to say, okay, how do we today bring out our best creative part to make that happen? And it is, as I describe it, kind of, it is a culture which takes time to develop. It takes experience to develop. Even if I give an entire lecture of this is what you need to do, you can't take the lecture home and say, tomorrow I'm going to do this. It's just through a lot of practice. And one of the big things here is for people to learn that everything they do is a practice and a prototype. I have this saying that I say that if you stop and look around you, everything you see was designed by someone. Baby Yoda, the microphone, your glasses, the Apple earphones, your shirt, the screen that you're seeing me on. This was all designed by someone. And when you work with a designer, they're constantly looking around and thinking, oh, I could redesign this to be like that, and I could redesign these to be like that. So it's a mindset of knowing that everything is open for something new. And in that way, you also want people to be continuously, the culture has to be one of doing these tiny little prototyping experiments and moving forward on very small steps, because the other side of that is the danger of a company, and I've had that too. A company comes in and says, we had this idea 8 months ago, we've just spent $3 million trying to develop it, and it's not going anywhere. Can you help us? And once you spend too much time on something, you start pouring bad money after good into it and trying to fix it. And what I always say is, if you have a great idea, even if it's for changing your entire billing system or something, what is the smallest slice of that idea that you can test out tomorrow for less than $50?
Yep.
What is a tiny step you can do? Do that one first. Now come back to me and let's see. So that is the mindset that the culture needs to adopt in order to be able to, we sometimes say, fail forward, and just run through these testing and prototype your way forward. And then you can start scaling the solution up.
Yeah. And in that example, I just wanted to point out that that speaks to one of the things I try to principles I try to live by. And one of them is that being cheap is expensive. Because often, so when we're doing our work, when I'm doing my work, and it's common to encounter resistance to investing time and money in doing the research and the problem finding, the things that you were talking about, like figuring out what somebody's experience is. They're like, well, it's too expensive. And I'm like, well, what's the cost of cleaning something up 8 months later? So you
Yeah.
just, I mean, that was a great illustration. And I tried to apply that to myself, because sometimes like, oh, I just want to cut a corner or save some money, but then I have to think about there's something like this computer that we're speaking. It's one of the newer MacBook Pros. I spent some good money on that, but it's a really good tool, and it does make work a little easier. But sometimes,
Yeah.
I mean, it's really worthwhile, like biting the bullet and like bringing in a facilitator, or just investing a little bit more up front rather than ending up with a dud sometime later
Yeah.
that's very, very expensive to deal with.
When you're flying a plane, a 1 degree going off the course, if you keep going long enough, you're going to be really far from where you wanted to get.
Yeah.
Right. And I tell people, even just defining the problem. One of the things we say is fall in love with the problem. We live in a society where you learn from school, they teach you to immediately come up with the answer. The kid who gets the star is the kid who raised their hand first. We're kind of a solution-driven society, and we get educated to come up with the exact answer immediately. But if you take time to really understand the problem, it's really worth your while. And I say sometimes just defining the problem, write a sentence that defines your problem. If you change a word there, it might take you to a very different solution. So just coming up with the right, truly the actual words with which you write your problem statement is a serious kind of copywriting challenge.
Absolutely. Are you by chance familiar with Rory Sutherland? He works for Ogilvy.
No.
No, he's check him out on YouTube. I'll send you some links another time. He's just literally jolly good fellow, and I think one of his latest books is called Alchemy, and he's in the kind of psychological behavioral econ, behavioral design space, and counterintuitive guy. So he says that sometimes the opposite of a good idea is also a good idea. and yeah, the example about school, he just brought up some memories of me solving a math problem, but I didn't do the work in the way that the teacher wanted, so therefore it was wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's
I
such a
remember those.
what a horrible way to educate people. And like you and I'm assuming that you do, I definitely encounter this, is part of my job is to like try to erase release people from that mindset and just approach the problems kind of like in the way that you're speaking about.
Yeah, it's called unlearning, and unlearning all the obstacles that keep us. If you give a child a crayon and a piece of paper and say draw something, they'll dive in and do amazing work. Give it to an adult and they'll just sit there, and unless they're a graphic designer and they're really comfortable, they won't do anything. There's this popular game that's played in innovation workshops of building a spaghetti tower. You take a couple of spaghettis, you get a few spaghettis and a piece of tape, and you got to build a spaghetti tower and maybe balance a marshmallow on top. And they've done studies, and the ones who come up with the best solutions are kids. You look at designers, engineers, people like that, they just sit around arguing. They don't try, they just try to design the best thing. And by the time the exercise, the 20 minutes are over, they haven't built anything, or they've built one thing and it crashed. The kids, the first thing they do, they start just playing with it.
Yeah.
And there's no inhibitions. And somewhere you got to unlearn all those layers that were taught to you at school when you came with the right solution, but oh, you didn't do it the right way.
Yeah, exactly. There's something I didn't hear in your answer that I just wanted to touch on out of curiosity, because you were speaking about like leadership and the leader providing like the permission and the air cover, and then tools and mindsets and activities. But I didn't hear you mention space, like physical, like space, like working space, studio. Do you have any thoughts, especially because of your work, your thesis was about designing spaces? Do you have any thoughts about spaces that are conducive to creative work, and then the opposite, maybe spaces that inhibit creative work?
Yeah. I'd say that if you take Maslow's hierarchy, the space has to be comfortable in the sense that there's fresh air, not too hot, not too cold. The furniture is comfortable, so you're not going through physical pain or anything. And unfortunately, now I'm thinking of all these sweatshops and pictures of places where people are suffering and supposed to work. But I'd also say that it's all in the mindset. And once you've got that basic level of comfort there, because people have an idea that, oh, a creative space, it's got to be very colorful with all these cushions and people can throw Nerf balls around and all that bullshit. It's not right. It's not right, because if you get a great team of creative people, you put them in a blank white room, they will be very creative. And you get a team of stuck-up executives who are afraid to innovate because they're afraid to take a risk, because they're afraid to lose the job they fought for 40 years. And you put them in the most creative environment and they just sit there and don't do anything.
Yeah.
Personally, I believe very strongly in visual thinking, or the visual expression of ideas. And so I just need lots of whiteboard spaces, either to draw on or to stick Post-its on and stuff. I know Post-its have become this almost the identifier of innovation. But the idea behind it, and let's say, so a Post-it, let's take a Post-it as an artifact, okay? Why is a Post-it a good thing? Because with a Post-it and a Sharpie, a thick pen and a small piece of paper, it forces you to condense your ideas to just a few words. You can't write War and Peace on a Post-it. So the tools, back to my thesis even, the tools shape our behavior.
Yes.
And there's another thing, when you work together with a team, it's very important to be able to kind of stand shoulder to shoulder and look at your output and look at your joint vision, which is the most important thing for a team to have, right? And that's why, so I love using Miro online. There are other similar tools, but it's always important, other than face to face, to be able to have a context where we're shoulder to shoulder, looking out into the space we're exploring and having a joint vision.
Yeah.
So for the space, I'd say whiteboards, comfortable furniture, and tables, work tables. There's a difference between sitting forward and leaning back. Many innovation spaces have these lounge chairs and deep sofas and stuff. I personally don't like that. I like where you can sit and write and scribble and build little prototypes. I love a good work surface. And I'll just finish by saying the absolute worst places for creativity and innovation to happen: walk into any boardroom in any big corporation.
Yes.
With a huge marble table in the middle and these deep leather chairs where people sit around. There's nothing creative going to happen there. Guaranteed.
I've worked in one of those. Yeah, it was a challenge to bring it to life, but we managed, but it wasn't awesome. I was gonna ask.
Well, let me just
Yeah.
ask you, what do you like in a space?
Natural light is very nice. Again, I'm based in
Mm,
Miami, so we've been fortunate to work with a couple of clients where we were like on the 20-something floor and everything was just, the walls were all glass and it looked out to the water and it was very pretty view. So that
yeah,
alone is like inspiring, right? Versus the opposite of that, right? And the glass was also great space to stick up like these large canvases and the sticky notes, everything stuck to that. And the client, I remember this one time we had a little bit of friction with the client because he was understanding what we needed space wise, and then they wanted to do something else with the space because like in this case it was a luxury company, and there was something just about appearances in a certain way that but it wasn't conducive to having surfaces where things stuck. So anyway, so we overcame that, and then at the end, I acknowledged, I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, we kind of had that friction, but now do you see? And then they were like, they got over their initial reaction to us
yeah,
pushing back, but then they understood. They're like, oh yeah, no, absolutely, totally get it now. Like how you need like 10 feet of space at least per team to just have room to unpack things and then have your canvases and sticky notes and all the other things that
yeah.
all the other visual tools that you're using. And just about that, let me just ask you out of curiosity, both in Spanish, I'm originally from Ecuador, so you know, Spanish is my first language, and in English, in both languages, there are these metaphors, right, that we use when we understand what somebody says. It's like, oh, I see what you're saying, like I
Yeah,
see, like I see,
yeah.
right? And in Spanish, there's something similar. Is there something similar in Hebrew that like when you understand somebody, like what might be like the metaphors, the words that you use when you get somebody else?
So this is a really interesting point because it
Mm,
brings up the fact that individuals have different ways of experiencing the world and digesting what they're seeing, kind of
mm-hmm,
translating perception, sensation into perception. Some people, most people, we live in a very visual culture.
mm-hmm,
So visual is a very strong component. Some people, though, respond better to what they hear. And these are the people that you can hear cues, as you said, in the way people speak. Oh, that sounds good to me.
yeah, that's true.
Some people are more what's called kinesthetic. They say that feels right. That feels solid. What a solid idea. So again, you get one of the, as a mentor to teams, one of the things is to notice, because sometimes people miscommunicate just because they're using two different modalities of presenting information. Somebody's trying to show something to someone who's very auditory, and they need to hear the words.
Yeah,
They're much more into the words than the picture, even
right,
if it's just a stick figure.
right.
But again, in our culture,
Mm-hmm,
and we say it, what's your vision? Does the company has a vision? Does the team have a vision? And there's something about a picture is worth 1,000 words. I
mm,
can walk into a room at the end of the day and see the work that's been produced on the walls, and there's it's a reward and reinforcement for the team to step back and say,
yeah.
wow, this is what we did in an hour's brainstorming. We have 75 ideas. That's amazing. So there's that level there too, of being
Mm-hmm,
able to just
yeah.
look out at it.
And this is just an anthropological question. So in Hebrew, like two young friends, they're 15 and one is trying to explain
Yeah,
something to the other, and then the other finally understands. It's like, oh,
yeah,
I get it. Like
yeah,
what are some metaphors or things in just in the culture and the language that are used to acknowledge that you finally understood what somebody's trying to
yeah.
communicate to you?
So there is this a literal translation of that sounds good, that
Okay.
looks great. that feels right. So all those are definitely used a lot.
Yeah.
I'd say more if we're talking about culture, different cultures have different metaphor systems. Israel, because everybody at age 18 goes to the army, a lot of the language that's used is military language. You can say, wow, that's a real bomb, or that is that's explosive. People use those terms just like here in America, people say touchdown or home run.
Right.
That's the people use the sports metaphor a lot.
Yeah.
Sadly, I'll say in Israel, a lot of the vernacular has to do with the military.
Interesting. Leon, so we're going to move along here. And as you well know by now, the name of this project is Making Business Art. Just curious, what comes up, what bubbles up for you when you hear that phrase?
Well, the first thing that comes up for me is wanting to ask you, what does art mean to you? So,
well, I am not in the business of defining art, so I'm just gonna put that out there. But for me, it's not so much about what art is; it's about how we feel, and that's part of the nut, the kernel of what this project is about. Can we capture the feeling that we experience if we're at a fun concert, or we're inspired by a movie, or we're watching a play or a musical, or just experiencing just really thoughtfully made food? Can we capture that in our day-to-day life? And most of our day-to-day life is spent making a living in business. So it's going back to just making living, just having more enjoyment and ease and those experiences. So I'll start with that, and then there's just a lot more that I can poke at. But that's part of the spirit of the project, and so it's at the end of the day, it's about designing for emotion and designing for experience in some ways, and self-expression. And going back to the example of the potential client lead that you had, who wanted to be the Steve Jobs of finance, was it, or payments or something? That reminds me of a there's a clip of a interview with Bruce Lee that if you go on YouTube and you search Bruce Lee self-expression, where he's talking about honestly expressing ourselves and how hard that is to do, because we deceive ourselves. So we can just create all these phony things and just be very phony and try to look good. But then he acknowledged to express ourselves, how hard that is, and how you have to be very honest, and then B, really train yourself. In his case, he's talking about martial arts, obviously, but to train yourself so when you want to express yourself, it's there and you can. In fact, this podcast has a kind of affected sort of like snap sound that's inspired by that interview, because that's how the clip ends. It says, you have to train really hard, you have to be one with it, you just have to be like, and he just snaps his fingers. So it's about, also finding that inner kernel, that inner talent, that creativity, that thing that wants to that consciousness that just really wants to express something in this world, and do that, right? But we're buried under layers of solemnity and ego, and what work is, and what's appropriate in work, and what you can and can't do, and all the stuff that we were taught in school, things that we were talking about earlier about the pandemic and working remote, how it allows, it's opened up space to humanize, peer into people's lives, and maybe have a different sense of connection with people. So it's also about that. So it's about just human life and experience and expression. And honestly, the name is a little bit of a ruse, because it's, at the end of the day, it's really a project about becoming an artist of life. So it's, yes, there's the business, because we live in the material world, as you pointed out, and we have to make a living and so forth. But it's really just about making life more awesome. If I just boil it down to really simple terms. Anyway, so I'll stop there, because now you're interviewing me.
So I'll say I like breaking that apart, making, business, and art, those are the three elements, right? It's not making business art. It's not changing business into art. It's looking at the three essential elements. There's the making art, the creative part that makes. There's the business part that makes it, I'd say, sustainable. Because if you're an artist, you make one sculpture, that's one thing. But if you want to build a system that sustains itself, be it
That's right.
a business or be it the United Nations, you have to find a way for the business to work.
That's right.
And the art part brings people in, because art is so subjective. Art is so personal, and art is so experiential, that if you think of these three as a Venn diagram, and that point in the middle is the interesting one. How do we combine the personal with the creative and with the, I'd say, systemic thing that business brings in to create something new that's worthwhile?
Right. There's also a collective element to that too, like yes, and what you're sharing. I understand there's some research, I believe, done by psychologists where they find that people watching like a movie or like tuning into a story, the heartbeats of the crowd start to synchronize and sync together. And so that's one perspective. And then I've also been amazed.
I've also entrainment.
That's correct.
Yeah,
that's right. And I've also been amazed just how like Latin American artists, like pop artists or like salsa artists, they'll be like huge in Japan or like in China. And I'm like, they don't even understand. Like, but somehow it touches people. And these artists just have fans around the world. And there's something really awesome about that. It's very subjective and individual, but it's also very unifying and collective at the same time. So it has like those two faces, which is very fascinating.
Yeah.
So the next thing that we're just looking at time. So in making business art here, I wanted to start diving into another aspect of your work. So we talked about the creativity and your time at NASA, but now I want to start exploring leadership and inner space. So I think it's a very interesting aspect of the many things that you do. So can we first, well, let's just jump into acknowledging, and so jumping into this. So you're a student and explorer and practitioner of consciousness expanding practices. Let's just call them that. And I know that you're a meditator, but you also have explore and you work with psychedelics. So I just wanted to hear more about your experiences learning about that consciousness expanding work, particularly with psychedelics, and your experiences learning about that and in Latin America, and let's just start there, and then we'll unpack what you have to share.
Yeah. So like many people, I experimented and experienced some kind of consciousness expanding substances in my teens and 20s. And I was, first of all, I had some truly kind of not eye-opening, mind-opening experiences with kind of serious kind of shifts in perception and seeing things from a different angle. And I've always felt, even as a young person, that there's something serious about this kind of experience. It's not, I never felt like going to a party and going crazy or anything. It felt too deep and significant, and I'd say the word sacred, an exploration, because when consciousness expands, one thing that happens, and the purpose of this work is to get to know yourself better. Just as exploring the outer world is amazing, exploring our inner world is as amazing. And so what I've done throughout my life is try to understand these experiences, try to learn how people do these experiences. Clearly, for thousands of years, every culture has a way of transforming consciousness a bit in order to shift perception and see things differently. I did go down to Mexico, down in Huautla, did psilocybin mushrooms in a ceremonial way to understand how that happens, and have really, over, I'd say, 25 years now, really made a point of studying how these particular molecules are able to help us, right?
Yeah.
Both personally and also on a creative level, etc. What's interesting again with all these what are called psychedelics is that the intention with which you use them affects the experience you have. And so if they're done, and this is from all my studies, what I've learned is that if it's done with a guide in an organized way, with an intention, in a safe environment, with good preparation, and definitely a lot of integration afterwards, an experience like this can be very meaningful. And I'm happy to use the term transformative, because these are really profound experiences. People who want to do it just for fun, then it's like going to Disneyland, and go ahead, have fun, and be safe, because some of these substances are very powerful, and you have to take good care of yourself. But for me, that's been a very interesting area of exploration. I'd say that in the spirit of prototyping, as I said, you take a small thing, what can you do, and test out. So I developed a creative process called FreeStorming, which is a form of solo brainstorming using cannabis, because cannabis is legal. And so it's a guided process with preparation and integration, a guided process of coming up with new ideas using the expansive properties of cannabis. Again, cannabis on the one hand is recreational, but if used with intention, as one of the people who used my FreeStorming process said, it's recreational. It's a very creative kind of a medicine. So today we can, in California, experiment with these types of things. And I know that people are also doing work with other substances, psilocybin, MDMA, LSD. People are microdosing. I mean, it's become, Michael Pollan wrote the book, How to Change Your Mind, and that just exploded. It brought to the surface what everybody was doing underground. But suddenly people it was okay to talk about it. Right. So for me, it's been a fascinating world to learn about, for sure.
Yeah. I wanted to pull on the thread that we touched on earlier about the leader, and the leader providing the space and the safety. And it's almost like the leader is almost like a facilitator, essentially, right? Because those are the similar roles. And I have a background in anthropology, and one of my fascinations has been like traditional medicine and like traditional healers in particular, and how they're boundary walkers, right? And they're translators and kind of not gatekeepers, but facilitators, right? They help the patient or the people who are showing up to work with them. They do that translation in between worlds, and they facilitate and provide the safety for the person to go through, hopefully, some transformative experience, because generally people are there for some sort of healing or change in their lives, or they're dealing with something. Has there been a time that was memorable for you in interacting, in being in a space working with a traditional healer, that I don't know, that you want to share that you felt was very meaningful or transformative for you in some way?
Well, it was interesting. After I went down to study in Mexico,
Mm-hmm.
I I came back and I have a presentation that I've been giving of the parallels between being an innovation guide and
Yeah.
being a shaman.
Yeah.
And it really is providing the space, the safe space, providing the container for people to explore and expand.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting for me to see how there's rituals everywhere. We are animals that love rituals. And so the shaman has a ritual with smoke and bells and whatever she does to prepare the space and guide people. When we go in as innovation consultants, we have our post-its and our Sharpies and our whiteboards, and that's a ritual. It really, if a group walks into a room and there are many post-its and clear whiteboards around, it puts them in the right mindset and space to be creative. And so holding space for a kind of consciousness expanding ritual and holding space for an innovation journey is a very similar thing. And
Yeah.
so for me, it's been fascinating to see that.
Yeah. I mean, you live in California, so that's a place that attracts, for decades, it's just known to attract people who think differently, right, and who explore the world, or they live life in different ways. Mostly people who march to their own drum beat.
Well, you know what they say about the original people who came to California? So there was the Mayflower, and then people
Mm-hmm.
slowly started moving west because they didn't like New York or Connecticut. So they went a bit further west, and then they didn't like Indiana, Illinois. They went even more. And the people who arrived and were stopped by the Pacific were those people who, wherever they were, they said, no, there must be something better. So
Mm-hmm.
they ended up all on the West Coast, and they're still looking for new kind of territories to explore.
The nonconformists, yes.
Yeah.
There's a behavioral biologist from Stanford, Robert Sapolsky. So he touches on that
Yeah.
on one of his books, that this has like a genetic biology background. But yeah, basically the people who left Europe and then, over time kept pushing the boundary, then you kind of have
Yeah.
this genetic concentration of people with certain traits that are less
Mhm.
conforming and more adventurous, I guess, more risk taking. So I was so because California attracts these people, I'm sure you interact with leaders who have also experimented or with consciousness expanded practices, including or maybe including psychedelics or possibly other meditation and other things. Are there just observations, like do you have any observations about how these change people, or did they change the leadership styles, or is there
Oh,
something a little bit different about them that then shows up in their business in a certain way? I'm just curious what your observations are around that.
the two big things that come to mind, one is just empathy.
Mm,
There's a humility and an opening of the heart
mm,
that happens when people go through a experience of expanding consciousness and taking a good look at themselves, which has huge impact
yeah.
immediately. And they they definitely share with me their experience of going back to work and saying, everybody's asking me why I'm so nice suddenly. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so the empathy is one, and the other is a need to find more meaning in what they are
Mm,
doing. And again, find meaning on a very personal level. It's like, why am I here? I've got this grace period of 80, maybe 90 years if I'm lucky to live. Why was I put here? What is the best I can do while I'm here? And what's
Right.
the meaning of it? And those two things, when leaders go through those two transformations, it's a huge game changer. Now, again, we live in a material world, in a material body. The CEO who has gone through an experience like this and has these two insights has to go back and tell the board what he plans to do next week. So there's a lot of how do I navigate it? But people have literally, some people have stopped a particular production line in their factory because they realized that it was harmful. Some people have gotten up and left their job and said, this is not right.
Wow.
And I also get to work here with a lot of, today, more and more young people who, through this process of startup and all of that, have suddenly found themselves with what I consider to be way too much money for any one individual to have. And they're looking what to do with it because money is a lot of energy to hold. And they're saying, wow, when they realize, they say, I got lucky. How can I give back?
Right.
How can I do something good, something meaningful with what I have now that I have my car and yacht and 3 houses and 15 whatever?
Yeah. So we're gonna start winding down our conversation, but I do want to pull on another thread that I'm seeing here that I think it's really important to land on. So we're talking about somebody goes off, they have this transformative experience, they come back to the material world, the day-to-day world. Can we just spend a couple of minutes speaking about the importance of integration? Because it seems like it's not so much going to take psilocybin and having this big experience, although that might be very interesting. But living into those insights, I think in our day-to-day lives, that's really where it's at, right?
Yeah.
That's the killer app, if we want to use that language. Can you talk about your thoughts about integration and the importance of it? And what are some key things that can be very helpful in integrating like this massive experience back into day-to-day living?
Yeah. So integration, reflection and integration are everything. And we know that from the world of innovation. I mean, you have to stop, as I said earlier, have an intention, take an action, stop and reflect. What am I doing? What worked? What didn't work? Okay, go through the cycle again. In these types of expansive experiences, integration is really, you get, in a sense, when consciousness expands, it's like expanding your bandwidth to get a dump of insights coming in about yourself, about the world, about the relationships, all of that. The question is, what do you do with it? How do you integrate that, oh my God, experience with, I'm going to work tomorrow, I've got a family to deal with, I've got neighbors. And so a lot like, I'd say that, again, the similarities between the design thinking process and this process are huge. It's like, the way to integrate is to find those gems and say, okay, I got it. Maybe I was, in my session, I was told that I need to take better care of my body. How can I start building a better relationship with my body? Find a small thing that you can start doing on a regular basis. Don't say, okay, I'm going to start running a marathon every day, because after 2 days, you'll get injured and you'll collapse. You'll never run again. Say, okay, can you run 5 minutes every day for the next 2 weeks? And in 2 weeks, how are you feeling? What do you think? You want to run a bit more? Maybe you want to walk. What did you learn from it? Or I want to play a musical instrument. Also, don't go out and buy a $10,000 Selmer saxophone and find the best teacher, because it's a hard thing. Start small, but find ways to make meaning of those gifts of insight and perception you've been given, and to do it in a way to also honor yourself. If you've been doing something for 40, 50 years, it will take some time to change that. Just like if you go and work with a company and you want to teach them how to innovate, it's not that after a weekend with you, they're going to change their habits.
That's right.
You got to help them integrate it into their current way that of work that's appropriate to them, where they started from, and what the next step is.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing today, Leon. I'm going to now transition to our lightning round. So we're going to wind down our time together here.
Okay.
And for a lightning round, again, there's some silly questions there. Feel free to pass, but I do invite you and encourage you to play. And are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. First question is, can you describe your closet and what state it's in?
My closet is in a transitory state. I've just bought a piece of property here in California, and it has a house on it. The main house is for demolition. It's not livable. So there are 3 other structures on the property. The one I'm currently sitting in serves as, it's a 400 square foot building that serves as a bedroom and a closet. So behind me here, I've got these metro shelves with all my closet in it. And then the 2 other buildings, one's a kitchen and one's a living room. So right now, my closet is in transition.
So it's a metaphor for transformation, your closet right now.
Absolutely.
That's great. What is the last piece of media that you loved? That can be a book, a movie, a podcast, articles, anything else.
I'd go with, when you say the last one, it's not the last one I listened to, it's one I was exposed to lately. Yes, I saw a series, a BBC series called The Split. It's about, it had 3 seasons, and it's about a family who has a legal business. They do divorces, and the lawyer herself and her husband are getting divorced. It's superbly done, like only the BBC know to do, and I highly recommend it. The
Very
Split.
nice. The Split. Great. What is something that inspires you?
Music and nature.
Awesome. What's a song or a band that you must play during a road trip?
John Coltrane Quartet.
Very nice. And lastly, what do you want to see more of in the world?
Smiling people.
That's a great way to close this. Leon, share with the audience, what do you have going on? Why should people look for Innovationship, and where can they find you?
So the 2 places to look for me, one is innovationship.com, and there you'll see the work of, again, mentoring executives, guiding innovation projects, sharing my experience with design thinking and taking groups through creative processes. That's one place. And the other place is freestorming.com. And that's where I share about this innovative creative process where I want to help people be more creative and also build a productive and effective relationship with cannabis, which, if used responsibly, can be very interesting.
Absolutely.
And the third place is, if people come to California and come to my vegetable garden, they can pick from the lettuce and enjoy some of that too.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Leon, for being on Making Business Art today. Really enjoyed this conversation. Maybe we can have you back and chat some more about some other adventures and things that you have going on. But thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you. I loved hanging out with you for a couple of hours. conversation went to wonderful places, and I look forward to more.
Thank you. Take care, Leo. Bye bye.
Bye bye.